Welcome, friends, to the Examine Life podcast, where we take some of life's thorniest questions and deconstruct them in ways that are practical, philosophical, playful, and fun. I'm joined by my friend, Jonny Miller, and today's question is a good one. Should you listen to podcasts on 2X? What's up, Jonny?
It's great to be here, man. Yeah, I've been looking forward to some form of this conversation for a hell of a long time.
You're an inspiration, man. And I love Instagram because of you. We were talking about Instagram where you and I connected on Instagram stories, almost 8 years ago over surfing. Mm-hmm. And then we got to meet for the first time a couple months ago. So yeah, you are an Instagram success story in my world.
It's funny how I feel like our roles have been reversed, where I think like back in the day I was posting surf videos that you were jealous of, and now I'm living in Colorado. I can't surf, and now I'm like, oh god, I almost want to block K. I don't want to see all this surf footage.
I know. Speaking of surfing, you're a phenomenal surfer. You've surfed so many amazing spots. You're in the lineup and someone turns to you and like, hey, mate, how do you spend your days? How do you answer that question for them?
How do I answer that question? Well, currently, I would say podcasting and teaching a course about the nervous system. That's like my default answer. And otherwise, living in Boulder, training our puppy. I'd say most of my time right now is spent thinking about the nervous system and designing, running the course. That's kind of what I'm mostly up to these days.
I love that. And we're going to tie this nervous system conversation to this podcast, this Chipmunk speed, which we'll get into. But before we dive into that, one thing that really has struck me about you is that you do a ton of work on yourself. I want to paint a picture. The first time I met Jonny, he's probably like 6'2", just like strapping. Like looks like you could be in like Game of Thrones. You look like a Game of Thrones character, like one of the good guys. This game, like a surfer. You're super limber. Like you move like part like the shapeshifter, but you also have like this limberness of like a really athletic animal from the savannah. You didn't wear shoes. Okay, so I meet you, this Game of Thrones warrior character, but at the same time, you have this amazing, you're self-taught in kind of introspection, and you basically have done some kind of facilitated workshop for everything, for shadow work and breath work and ayahuasca and journeys that I've never even fucking heard of. And it's just like so amazing. And you have this list that we'll share. It's kind of the spiritual MBA that kind of goes through different, a sampler menu of some of these. I don't even know how to describe them. Workshops, in-person experiences. But what's really unique is I find it very different. As someone, for me, who feels more down the fairway, where it's like, I'll read a book and maybe I'll have a coach. You really immerse yourself in these different kind of training, self-discovery experiences. Tell us more about that.
Well, I appreciate the kind words and this image of like a British hippie that I feel like has now been formed in the mind's eye of the listeners. Yeah, I mean, I'd say for me, I think the time of like doing work on yourself, I'm not sure that that's how I framed it for myself. I've always loved adventure. Like even when I was a teenager, I loved reading about adventure. And then I went on these like expeditions in my 20s, stand-up paddleboarding and traveling. And I think that when I discovered initially meditation and then breath work and then plant medicine, it almost felt like there was this like terra incognita, this like unexplored landscape within myself that felt like the most interesting and exciting, like uncharted territory. So with that long list of things on the spiritual MBA, it's not because I'm so committed to like uncovering my shadows and I'm such a good person. It's more just I found them fascinating. And there's nothing more exciting to me than kind of like you, I think, like exploring these new parts of myself. Like for me, they're like tools for living an examined life, which I think you'd resonate with as well. So yeah, and I've been fortunate enough to have some time over the years and being connected to the right people. And I feel like it's hopefully a lifelong journey.
It is beautiful because I think that I love how you use adventure because it's funny. Like the word that came to mind for me being like the very serious, studious is like workshop, or there's like there's a real learning. We're here to learn about ourselves, and
Doing
you're
the work.
like exactly doing the work, 10K work, and you're just a gentle reframe. It's like this is an adventure. I think there's a playfulness to it, and it's really something that you embody. And so I'll share the link to the spiritual MBA, this list of adventures. But is there one adventure that was kind of earlier in your journey of, facilitated adventures that really stands out?
Yeah, I mean, the first one really for me was a 10-day Vipassana, which is, very accessible to pretty much anyone because they are donation based. So cost isn't a factor. And I think that for me and the fact that I was going through some intense loss at the time, that kind of like cracked me open in a way, and showed me how much like unexplored stuff that there was here for me. And then I think the second one was my first breathwork journey, which was in Bali, which for me was akin to a psychedelic experience. It was as profound and as intense as taking really any substance. And I just couldn't believe that purely through breathing in a certain way, this completely different, like altered state of consciousness could be unlocked. And so I think that also just like really, really poured fuel on the fire of like what the hell is going on here? Like I just wanted to understand intellectually, and I wanted to see how much more was possible, like with more training, with more practice, with more embodied learnings. So I'd say the Vipassana meditation is a great starting point. I really think almost everyone should try it at some point in their lives. And then also this conscious connected breathwork journey as well.
Beautiful. And Vipassana, that's 10-day silent meditation, effectively?
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Still on my list. So you know how much I love surf trips. And I didn't go on one really for the first 9 years of my daughter's life because I wanted to be there for bedtime and just to be with them. And so 10-day Vipassana, I still don't feel comfortable being away from my kids for 10 days. But I'm getting close. My eldest is kind of, likes the iPad more than me these days. So we're getting close there. And this will segue into our question, but this breath work, I think that I don't talk a ton about psychedelics. It's not really something I know much about. I've had a few experiences, and we can talk about that as well. But I think that there's definitely a group of our listeners that's like, that's a red line that they just are unwilling to cross, and
Sure.
I completely respect and honor that.
Yeah.
But breath work, if you could get a psychedelic experience from your lungs, I guess it's probably more than your lungs. Paint us a little picture of that first breathwork experience. Are you in like Ubud, Bali, is my guess?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, firstly, just to respond to what you said about meditation and your kids, I mean, I think that's beautiful. And I remember what Joe Hudson said when we were together a few weeks ago, where he viewed parenthood as like a spiritual path for him, and that he grew more from being a dad than any kind of retreat or experience that he'd done. So I really love that. And then in terms of breath work, yeah, I mean, really, that's what fascinated me. It was like, you don't need to take any substance. You don't need to ingest anything. There is this altered state of consciousness that's available for anyone, like free of charge. And I think something that I love about it is there's something very empowering about having these experiences and, healing different aspects of yourself without there being a shaman or a healer or something external to yourself that's doing it. It's purely you have access to your breath, and that is the thing that is making these changes. So yeah, to paint a bit more of a picture for listeners, what I'm referring to is a conscious connected breathwork journey. This is 60 to 90 minutes long. It is like held kind of by, there's a facilitator there, and there's a playlist. And the playlist kind of dictates the tone of the journey, usually without lyrics. You breathe in a certain way in a circular fashion, and very quickly this creates changes in blood chemistry which create an altered state of consciousness. And in this altered state, subconscious material or emotions can rise to the surface. And something that I now love about breathwork, having done hundreds of journeys and facilitated many myself, is that like the full spectrum of human emotions can come up. Like there might be a circle with 10 people and someone will be crying, someone will be like in joy and laughing, someone might be in anger. And it's like, I've not been in many environments where like everything is welcome and it feels like this like raw expression of humanity is available in these breathwork experiences. And so yeah, for me it's been my primary way of reconnecting to my emotions. I think like many British males, I was fairly disconnected as a kid. I say I was like numb from the neck down. I didn't really have much embodied awareness. I didn't even know what that meant. And through these breathwork journeys, I've had not only kind of insights and like just very ecstatic experiences, but I've come back into connection with my emotions essentially. And it's not all happened at once, obviously. Initially, I think it was grief, and then anger was like a big theme, and then shame was a big theme. And more recently, helplessness has been a big theme. Like all these things that you typically avoid habitually, right?
Yeah.
unless you like, you're kind of deliberately going into it. Like none of us wake up in the morning and be like, oh, I'm going to feel some shame today. Like I'm excited to feel shame. It's like, that just doesn't happen. So yeah, it's been profound for me. And I'm really passionate about sharing it as a practice and hopefully making it more accessible, because like you say, even though the psychedelic research is so promising and it's looking like it is going to be legalized, in the coming years, there's still a large subset of people that just won't take magic mushrooms, for example. And so I think for me, I see breathwork as having just as much potential with the right setting and the right therapeutic environment as psychedelics. So I'm really passionate about sharing it.
And so to even drill down further into that picture, you're laying like on a yoga mat with a group of people, presumably with the playlist.
I actually recommend like one-on-one settings to begin with, like while you're getting used to it. So imagine ideally a bit thicker than a yoga mat, so you're comfortable for 90 minutes, but just like a very thin mattress, basically. You're on your back, your kind of arms are out to the side, you're breathing a full vibrant inhale and then a relaxed, effortless exhale. And in the beginning, you have to kind of try and you have to remember to do the breath in the right way. But then at a certain point, it's like the breath starts breathing you and it just happens and you're just like witnessing everything that's unfolding.
Wow. I've been using the Othership app. I think you recommended it, or maybe Anita Amini recommended it. And they have this one thing. It blows my mind. It's a 1 minute breath. So it's 20-second inhale, 20-second hold. And that's hard. But the 20-second exhale at the end, your mind, I'm getting, look at my arm. I'm goosebumps just thinking about it. Yeah, that 20-second exhale is it's a bit of an out of body experience. And it's very uncomfortable. I don't have the lung capacity. And so that's just a 1 minute thing. I can't imagine stringing together different breathing modalities.
Sure.
All right, so we're gonna come back to nervous system mastery and breathwork. So let's jump into our question. For our listeners, if you would like to be in an environment, a coaching environment where we discuss these questions with like-minded, ambitious, kind, curious peers, make sure you check out radreads.co/coaching, and we have running cohorts. So why don't you start us off with the audio you have prepared?
Okay, yeah, sure. I think this is going to be a fun one. So I guess I'd invite listeners to, just before I hit play, so kind of like tune into your sense of your body, your interoceptive sense. And as you hear this audio, notice if anything shifts inside your body. Just that's the prompt. That's the invitation. All right. 3, 2, 1.
Others, previous to this conversation, you're going to find elements of specificity and measurability showing up again and again. So these are key features of any protocol that you are going to use in order to try and set and achieve your goals. And I should mention that setting specific goals and clearly defining the verbs that you're going to engage in to pursue those goals and defining how long you are.
All right, I'll pause there. So that was a clip from one of Huberman's recent episodes, and I love the Human podcast. I binge most of them, and yeah, I mean, I'd almost love for you to kick things off. Like what's your perspective, and is this something that you do for yourself?
So, I guess I've always been obsessed with efficiency. Obviously, supercharge your productivity, 10K work. I was a productivity blogger for many, many, many years until I've kind of distanced myself from that. But I'll paint you a very specific picture. I remember when my eldest daughter was born, and for those who don't have kids, there's a lot of just walking. You're like bouncing them on a yoga ball at 4 a.m. They won't sleep. They're crying. Mom's trying to sleep. You're like, fuck, I got to go to work tomorrow. And all this shit's going on in your head. And I remember doing that over and over and over, different permutations of it. Yoga ball, walking up and down the stairs. And then in my headphones, I was listening to at the time, the latest Michael Lewis book, Flash Boys, at that speed. So I have this very visceral memory of parenting where the early days, because I felt like I was wasting so much time. Yeah, I mean, wasting and not in, y'all know what I mean. Wasting in the sense that, hey, if I'm going to be up at 4 a.m. in the morning, I've got this crying blob on my shoulder, I might as well make good use of that time. And no, you can't just listen to the latest Michael Lewis book at single speed, because that would be you'd be an ignoramus for doing that. You really got to squeeze the juice out of these podcasts. And so for many years, I would say probably 8 to 10 years, I listened to podcasts and audiobooks between 1.5 and 2.5. With a little extra bonus, there was this app called Overcast, and they had something called Space Saver, I think, or Pause Saver. So they basically, I mean, this is so fucking absurd to me now. And look, I was a huge believer of this. I wasn't necessarily a huge evangelist of it, because I always thought it was a little bizarre. But the Overcast app would strip out the spaces between the words and just shrink them. So you could get a 20% boost on that. So, you'd be listening to something at 1.7 to 2.7x, you being me.
Yep.
And, I think that there was this starting point where we could talk about it, like the rational brain. The rational brain was basically saying, make every moment of your life useful. Squeeze as much utility as you can out of every moment. Kind of like your classic productivity trope. We should talk about what's behind that. And then the tools like podcasts and audiobooks was to just throw them on overdrive. I don't know. It feels just icky now. Just all the whole thing is almost like doing a lot of coke or something. It's like knowledge worker cocaine. Just start shoving it down like as fast as you can. But I am deeply empathetic to anyone who feels the need to listen to podcasts at really high speeds, because I understand a lot of the pain and the frustration and the angst that are associated with it. So that's the context that I bring to it. But I really do bring it more from a rational, like, oh, let's get more time, let's squeeze more time out of the stone as possible, and this is an easy way.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I was thinking about this before we hit record, and I think that the interesting perspectives that maybe we can explore for this are that I have this theory, it's like a hypothesis, that when we listen to podcasts, yes, we're getting the information, but we're also co-regulating with the podcast host or the speaker. And what I mean by that is our nervous systems are literally like attuning to their level of either kind of sympathetic activation or parasympathetic relaxation. So to give an example, like I will listen to, and I did this like unconsciously for a while, but I'd listen to like Andrew Huberman in the mornings, who has a kind of like fairly upbeat, fairly fast paced, fairly kind of like jam-packed way of speaking, to get me going in the mornings. And then in the evenings, I'd like listen to Tara Brach or Krista Tippett in On Being. And after a while, I was like, why am I doing this? And realizing that just as, you know, when you're in a room with like 5 other people, like you are the average of the 5 nervous systems that you're around. And so much information is communicated through someone's voice. Like I think voice maybe more than anything else. Certainly like the way someone's standing like might have an impact, but there is a huge amount of data that's being transferred to our subconscious by the tone that someone's speaking. And we humans have been hardwired to associate high-pitched voices with like frantic, frenetic, like anxious, kind of like intensity. So if your objective is to, you know, almost like you said like doing a line of coke, like like if your objective in that moment is to really get amped up and fired up, then yeah, like listen to a podcast on 3x and you'll probably find your heart rate going faster. You'll find your breathing will be faster, it'll probably be shallower. And so I think it's just really helpful to be aware that is generally speaking what's happening when we're listening to anyone's voice, either through headphones or in person, who is speaking that way. And unless you know you're doing breathing exercises and you're lying down and you're actively calming yourself, it's almost going to happen by default. And so I suppose what I like to offer is that it's not that it's a bad thing, but just like as if someone was drinking a double shot of espresso because they like the taste, but they were totally unaware of the effects that caffeine have on their system, and they're doing like 6 shots in the morning. It's like, that's kind of what's happening when someone's listening to a podcast on this speed. And so I think that's the perspective that I'd like to bring. It's like, yeah, like don't stop doing it if you love it, but just do it in like an intentional way.
Yeah. So you said your heart rate would go up. You probably have, with faster speeds, you probably have shallower breathing. Is there a downside to always living in that mode, right? Because you gave a nice balance of, you know, aggro, typically male podcaster, fast talker, information transfer. And then you had this kind of, you said Krista Tippett and Tara Brach. They're much more spiritual, again, very loose generalizations. What happens if you live a life of shallow breathing, high heart rate, information consumption, cocaine style? Like well, how does that manifest in the body, in the mind?
Yeah, well, there's a number of different ways to answer it. And it definitely depends on the person. Like some people have like an enormous nervous system capacity for whatever reason. A lot of it's genetic. And so they could probably keep going for 5, maybe even a decade, 5 to 10 years. Some people it's, a few months to a year. But eventually what's known as allostatic load builds up. And when we're in this kind of high tone sympathetic state, to use the jargon, and we
Can you
don't
say that?
have...
Can you translate that when you say sympathetic and parasympathetic?
So sympathetic, it's like the activated part of our nervous system, which is essential. It gets activated when we run away from danger, when we're in fear. It's like a mobilization reflex. It like gets us ready to take some sort of action. So in the mornings, generally, like that's an amazing thing. Like you actually want cortisol in your body. You want to be activated. But if there isn't a kind of an equal and opposite period of the relaxation side of things, which is the parasympathetic, then a lot of chronic stress or allostatic load gets built up in the body, and this presents in inflammation, it presents in health crises down the line, and burnout is kind of the most common certainly in the tech world. And I went through that when I was in my mid-20s as well. I kind of, in hindsight, was doing a lot of the things I now say that's silly, but it's just
that makes like 2 of us.
Yeah, and
that's
and
wisdom, right?
It's wisdom, and I think when you're in that state, the other thing to mention is that it also feels good to kind of you actually seek out other people and practices that amplify that sense of like intensity, and many of these people also maybe the only way they're able to unwind is with alcohol or with substances, or for some people it's like sex addiction, these things where they need something outside of themselves in order to downshift. And that I think is where there may not be a problem in the short term, but at some point there will be some kind of like crisis. It could be a relationship blowing up, it could be burnout, it could be a health crisis. And so that's, I guess, what I just want to make people aware of.
Yeah. And so I guess maybe said differently, so the sympathetic is kind of the fight or flight. Mm-hmm. And I think, as I'm listening to you talk, it's like a tenseness to your body, like you said, shallow breathing.
Narrower gaze, like your eyes get more contracted and more focused. Thoughts tend to race and loop more.
Yeah, looping thoughts. And like anything, there needs to be a harmony with the parasympathetic. Mm-hmm. And when there's that imbalance, what did you call it? The acid something load?
Oh, the allostatic load.
Allostatic load, which maybe in layman's term is that you kind of stress buildup. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I say emotional debt is kind of the
emotional
term
debt.
I use. Mm-hmm.
Got it. And I know, I'm the classic example of this pattern, and I'm working to unwind it. I did a long episode on my relationship to alcohol, because for me, it was go, 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 go. And even when it wasn't podcast at double speed, it was just this intensity to any task at hand, right? It's like, you can't just surf. You have to be like an intense surfer. You can't just lift. You have to go do, dead, like 300-pound deadlifts, right?
Yeah.
Like everything has this even reading, like you can't read Harry Potter, you have to read Dostoevsky, right? This is my internal narrative, right? I don't watch TV, I watch documentaries, right? So everything is this kind of in service of something. And so you could see why the podcast at double speed is just, it's that on caffeine, right? On overdrive, just more, faster. And I have a lot of spiritual practices. I don't think that meditation really helps me downshift that much. I think because it's still very heady and kind of cerebral for me. It's, thoughts, observing thoughts. You might use language like it's not embodied, so to speak. I'm not feeling my body still. I'm still really in my head. Mm-hmm. And for me, alcohol has been this, it's the only way, I've said, it's the only way that I can just chill, like just make it all stop and really find peace. But again, we know with alcohol, it's an ephemeral, it's not a real peace. And long story short, is I feel it all kind of trending towards some kind of breaking point, because I just see the unsustainability of it, because you need more alcohol. And it's funny, it's like, I think of my relationship to alcohol is really my relationship to achievement, right? It's this kind of, it's not like, I don't have it for social settings and things like that. It's just like, I put so much pressure on myself, and the only way to ease the pressure is to drink, or it's like two other things, like Bikram yoga, where you like actually literally can't think about anything else, or boxing. You can't think about anything else, or you get punched in the face.
Right.
So I could see that chronic stress build up in me and starting to kind of like feel different breaking points. I'll turn that to you, and you have a lot of your students, your peers. You have a lot of examples in this archetype. It's kind of high performer. I've seen you. Not mock, but I've seen you poke
Mock's
fun at. It's funny because I use high performer in a lot of our marketing, because it's just it's like the siren song, right? It's kind of it's a siren song to like we can relate.
Everyone wants to be a high performer.
Yeah. And there's society celebrates high performers, at least like mainstream society. But you've worked with, you've seen, you've met, you've done business with a lot of these high performers. Can you speak a bit about that debt that you've seen, and how it's manifested in different archetypes or your examples in your experience?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for sharing. Like, I really appreciate you sharing a story. I think what I want to maybe preface it with is that High performance is great. Like there's actually like I don't see anything intrinsically wrong with. I mean, there's nothing intrinsically wrong about any of this, but the desire and like the drive and that intensity to kind of achieve mastery and to win and to I see that as amazing. I think what is maybe being missed is and capacity at both ends. So I interviewed Kevin Kelly recently, and he said a great work ethic needs to be paired with a great rest ethic. And I think this is kind of what we're talking about. It's not that the drive and the intensity and the desire to learn and to be the best at what you do is bad. Like I think that's amazing. I think the challenge is, well, there's maybe two pieces. I think one is exploring where that desire is coming from and potentially switching the fuel source, as some people say, and changing what the motivational piece is. And the other is really cultivating the skill of downshifting. So just as, if someone was, I imagine listeners could relate to like an Olympic athlete, like they can only be at the top of their game for a very short period of time during the year. And for them, recovery is just as important as training. Like overtraining is foolish. It's stupid. Like if they're training more than their body can actually recover and integrate, it's not going to help their performance. And so I think the piece of the conversation that I'm trying to like advocate for are balancing these intense practices of boxing, of these like sympathetic activating things with, and we need the rest piece as well. Whether that's breath work, whether that's yin, whether that's non-sleep deep rests, like there needs to be the equal capacity in the parasympathetic to match the sympathetic. And I think that's the piece that's getting missed off. And I think that's very hard for a lot of people because we weren't taught how to downshift or how to use our physiology to change our state. And so we've relied on external substances to do it. I think that's the main challenge. And with regards to your question around like what does it look like when this happens? I mean, I've coached a number of founders at this point who've been through burnout. For some, they lost their company. For others, they lost their marriage. Yeah, and the one founder I've been working with for years, there's still like pain and hurt kind of in his body from that experience and living in fear of it happening again because it was so challenging. And I think unfortunately for many people it does take, I like to use the metaphor of like a feather brick dump truck. For some people it's like they get tickled by a feather and they're like, oh, the way I'm working right now is stupid, that's not sustainable, I'm going to make changes. Other people it's a brick, maybe they feel exhausted one morning, and other people it's the dump truck, and that could be chronic health disease, it could be burnout. It shows up differently for different people. But it usually takes some form of, honestly, suffering to kind of get people to make that shift.
Do you think that part of the challenge, at least in like America, in the West, is the reliance on substances to basically play that role of downshifting, to play that?
I think it's part of it. The substances are, again, in the technical literature, they're known as defensive accommodations. That's like the technical term. And it's not that they're the problem. The challenge is the lack of, sorry for using all these technical terms, but ventral vagal tone is basically the part of our nervous system that allows us to go from really activated to calm. And that you can think of that tone it's like muscle tone. It's like that is a muscle that we can build. And the more reps that we do where we're able to kind of successfully downshift our state without any external substances, the more that becomes like hardwired into our body. And so that's the piece that was often, and that was developed for many people during childhood with like healthy, secure attachment to caregivers. And for many people, that ventral vagal tone just wasn't built. It's like someone, just doesn't have a strong biceps or something. It's just it's like a physiological thing that means it's harder for them compared to the average person to be able to downshift into relaxation. And so that's the thing that needs to be kind of worked on.
Wow. So it's a muscle. Can we use the metaphor as it's a muscle of sorts to?
We can use the metaphor for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're so good at the intensity muscle, but the relaxation muscle, for lack of training, over-reliance on substance, might I add, kind of societal norm, societal stories.
I think that's
makes it so hard. So the first thing that comes to, I found this clip, by the way, fantastic interview. You probably heard it. Tim Ferriss on Rich Roll.
Yeah.
And he said something, I've heard this all the time. And so you probably, we've talked about breathwork as the way to build this emotional regulation muscle. But Tim Ferriss says that people always ask him about meditation, and their biggest concern about meditation is, I'm going to lose my edge, or I'm going to get soft if I learn to meditate. And so I could imagine, this emotional muscle this emotional regulation muscle, people must be like, fuck that thing. Like, I think that people hear, when they hear meditation and these other ways of downregulating, their head immediately goes to this place of, it's going to rob me of the tool that has made me so successful in this container of, again, Western society, capitalism, startups. Pick, Wall Street, pick your container, but they're all kind of the same container at their core. What do you say to that? Like, this, I'm going to lose my edge. If someone's listening to this conversation, they're like, yeah, these two, like, hippie Game of Thrones surfers, work for themselves. And you're like, I got to make money on Wall Street. I can't be soft like these two guys. Well, I'm not implying that you're soft. I'm just saying this person would say that we're both soft because we feel too much. What do you say to that person that's scared of losing their edge?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. And I think this is why I shared that for a lot of people, not everyone, for a lot of people, it does take some kind of crisis for them to wake up to be like, oh shit, like the way that I've been living actually isn't working out for me. Because in the short term, like you say, like it can be very, like there's people on Wall Street, startup founders that have made a shit ton of money through operating in this mode. And so in the short term, on the surface, it looks like it's working out really well. It's only in like the long arc of time over, 5 years, a 10-year period, that it becomes obvious that it's not a good strategy for the long term. And so I think that's one piece. And then I think the other piece that Tim Ferriss actually does a really good job of articulating is that you can change the fuel source. And the process of changing the fuel source, in the short term, there might be a drop in productivity. There probably will be a drop in productivity. There's actually a great example I heard from a Montessori school teacher where they took kids out of kind of traditional schooling, intensive education. And the pattern they saw was that for 3 or 4 months, the kids would just like sit around. They would look really lethargic, look as if like they weren't doing anything. And then at a certain point, usually after like the 4-month mark, this like light switch would flip and they would just become these voracious, curious learners about everything. And they tapped into that like intrinsic desire and excitement to learn once they'd kind of recovered from the previous schooling system. And I think there's a similar analogy with the way that we work. If we're being driven by like consciously or subconsciously, like trying to prove ourselves to someone, to a father figure, or to validate ourselves, or to chase money because we think that's going to help us to feel more safe, secure, power, like whatever the story is. It can be a great driver in the short term, but it's, for me anyway, it's far more enjoyable to wake up and be like genuinely freaking excited. Like I was really excited to have this conversation with you. I'm excited to like record videos for the course I'm built. Like I'm waking up, I mean like fuck yeah, like I get to do this. I'm so excited to do this. And that for me is, even if I were to lose like performance, which I honestly don't think I am, I would take that. Like I would take the hit in performance for the deeper fulfillment and joy that you get to feel. And I've spoken to many people that kind of feel the same.
you think there's zero sum? Let's say your goal is to make as much money as possible. Can you make as much money as possible and still feel that aliveness? Or do you need to say like, this is the season for making money and I'm going to tampen down this aliveness. I'm going to take on a chronic stress debt? Or is there a way that, there's this Taoist phrase, Wu Wei. It's kind of like this effortless action where you just, it's kind of like Rick Rubin, right? He shows up, dude knows nothing about making beats, and he has some of the most iconic albums in country, hip hop, rock and roll, metal, jazz, you name it, right? I think some people look at that, and he would make the case that says if you show up regulated with that aliveness, with that healthy balance, without the unhealthy motivation, like I don't think Rick Rubin like sits in his studio being like, I want to be the best fucking like beats maker in the world. But I think that people would say like he's a total outlier. And I think the listeners are always saying like there's a trade-off, right? There's a trade-off for, let's say financial success. Like I gotta tamp down my aliveness for some of my financial success. I've gotta incur some chronic stress debt to maximize my income. You think that there's zero sum, or is there a Rick Rubin path for all of us?
I'd like to believe that there is that path for everyone.
Yep.
And I think there's many interesting examples and case studies that can maybe give people who are in the other camp some hope. So I think of there was a study I remember seeing on, I believe it was on Wall Street Traders, where they looked at their interoceptive capacity. So literally their ability to notice their internal sensations and like trust their gut feelings. And the ones that had higher interoception actually made better trading decisions and made more money. So I think that's an interesting like concrete example in which it's a direct path to more money. Then there's the stories of you have the Michael Singer who wrote the Surrender Experiment, who was basically a hippie who meditated for 3 hours every day, and he made the commitment to himself to just follow his impulses and say yes to whatever life was bringing him. And he ended up building a multi-million-dollar software company. And it almost feels like there's a kind of I haven't articulated this before, there's almost a curve where maybe again in the beginning, whilst you're still kind of finding your feet, maybe there's a sense of I don't know how, I feel lost, I don't know what I'm doing. But at a certain point, I think the greatest performers, artists, creatives, CEOs, and someone like Joe Hudson would definitely confirm this, are people who are very in touch and attuned to their bodies and to their emotions. And when there's tension, that's that's a cue to explore what's there. And Joe says that whenever we think we have a decision to make, that's just an invitation. There's an emotion to be felt, and then it just becomes the next most obvious step. So in many ways, I think that you can make a very compelling case for emotional regulation as a productivity tool. I've seen that in myself. It frees up so much more energy, and you don't need to take the coffee. You can just have a lot more life force running through you.
I think it's so beautifully said. And, it's kind of one of the, there's a Jim Carrey quote. Everyone wants to be rich and famous until they become rich and famous, right? It's if someone wants to be rich and famous, that quote's not going to dissuade them, right?
Yeah, sure.
you kind of have to experience it. And that's why I love having these conversations where, I can't tell you that it is or it isn't a zero-sum game. You and I are not here saying that there are trade-offs, but what we can do is share the experiences, share the learning, share our own experiences. I give two quick examples with myself. I have been buying the S&P 500 since I was 16 years old, and I've never sold a share. And in fact, I remember usually I have this rule, and I've only done it twice, but the rule is when you go to bed and you wake up and you go to bed and you say to yourself, I don't know what the world's going to look like tomorrow. That is the day you should invest a fuckload of money in the stock market. And so the day so the most recent day where that happened was the the day they shut down the economy with COVID, with the pandemic. Because you went to sleep and you're like, what is the world going to look like tomorrow? And I think I invested like $20,000 in the stock market the next day. The other day, I didn't do it, but this is where I got the idea, was the Lehman Brothers failed on September 13th. It was a Sunday night. So that night was that same feeling. I wonder what tomorrow, and it was like the market was down 1,000 points the next day. And so I've been able to, because I do feel pretty regulated, at least financially, when it comes to my relationship with investing. Whenever things feel bad, I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. There's like a peacefulness. There's no like checking. I'm not reading more stuff. I'm not consuming more information. And so I feel that real freedom, and my portfolio can validate that I've made the right decision time and time again for 25 years. And I do attribute that to financial, emotional regulation. So that'll be the first example. And I always tell people, it's like, when the market, if you are a Wall Street trader or you deal in markets, the day that market goes down 7% and you're panicking, all of your greatest insecurities are going to come, like, they're going to jump out of your body in the most violent way possible. Wouldn't you want to get a grip on that before it happens? Right? Like, isn't that the moment you want to be the most lucid, the most steadfast?
Yep.
So that would be the first example. The second example is more on this kind of Rick Rubin. I think that when you and I hung out at that retreat, I was kind of in this moment where, trying to figure out where I was professionally. Do I push harder in online courses? Do I push harder in some of the games of being an, quote unquote influencer and so on? And in that time, in that trip, in that retreat, and from this point on, I've kind of just said, fuck it. I'm just like, I'm going to pursue aliveness.
Nice.
I'm not, and this podcast emerged from that. And I have a rule for this podcast: no prep. I refuse to do any prep. I don't, because prepping a podcast to me is a aliveness killer. That just for me. That doesn't mean that for everyone, but for me it is. And this podcast has gone great with no prep. In fact, prepping made me more in my head and like trying to fit a script and all that. Same thing with writing a book. I'm like, I'm going to write a book. I don't know if it's going to get a book deal or self-publish. I'm just going to write it. And then we'll just see, right? It's just like following the aliveness. So I just share those as the two examples. I'm curious because you coached me a lot during that retreat where, again, to set the stage, I was really confused. Like, I could go harder on like info products, digital, like, we were with some big time influencers at this event. And there was a part of me that's like, nah, it's not for me. Like, but I wasn't willing to let go of it. And so was eating away at my aliveness. So I don't know if you had anything to comment, because you helped me a lot in kind of talking through some of the things.
Yeah, there's so much that comes up for me there. One thing is I'd love to read like Kay's rules for aliveness. Like I love that you have this kind of this, I guess it's like the analytical part of you creates these almost like if this then that type rules, like whether it's investing in the stock market or whether it's like no, I've seen this pattern and over time like this specific thing reduces my aliveness, so I'm just going to make a rule for myself and not do it. It's like a beautiful, it's like a principle for life. So I really love that. And I do a similar thing. I call if this then breathe. And it's like, if I'm noticing a particular sensation in my body and if I'm attuned enough to see it, then I do a breathing practice. And like over time, I've done that enough times. I'm like, this pays off. This is this is worth my 3 minutes of my time to do. Yeah. And the money story that you shared as well was interesting too. Like for me, I actually had a very challenging period when I was in Bali where I haven't shared this publicly, but I lost over $400,000 in crypto. Wow. And that for me was like, and I didn't have a lot of money. And that for me was this real, like, it was a real wake up moment. And I then did a bunch of breathwork journeys and like breathed through these like money related emotional challenges that I'd had. And so and this is kind of how I now view like work, partnerships, like marriage, like these things are ways in which life is like showing me a way that I still have like some tightness, constriction in me. And it's like, oh, like interesting, or it's not immediately, but like at some point I'm like, okay, there's clearly something here. I'm gonna go do a breathwork journey and like hopefully work through it and create more aliveness on the other side. And so, yeah, I think that as well has been a very like transformative belief, I guess, in that like when I get triggered by something, again, like it's not always like right away, but at some point, whether it's an hour later, a couple of days later, I'm like, okay, maybe Kelly says something, she's like, there's something here for me, and I'm gonna like investigate, and usually it tracks back to something that happened in the past. Most of the time.
I love that the breath work and the feeling. I mean, I think I actually want to talk about this feeling. I think that most people listening to this have never felt their body. It sounds kind of pornographic, but you know what? They've never they don't know how to feel. And I think that our listeners, myself included, are extremely cerebral. Everything's in the head. And I think that, you know, Sam Harris had this amazing thing. He was talking about the hedonic treadmill, but he put it in the most simple framework. He's like, look, let's say you want a promotion. So you think about the promotion, you think about the promotion, you think about the promotion. You get the promotion. It comes with this series of physical sensations, like the minute you get promoted. And they might last for a couple of seconds, couple hours. And you have this like physical, right? Because like, what do you want the promotion for? You want you want to feel it, right? Mm-hmm. And then the physical sensation goes away, and then it becomes a memory. Mm-hmm. And I know that the listeners will be like, well, there's the status, right? But again, you could play that over. It's like, okay, so you're some big shot. Someone's like, hey, there's the big shot. And again, you anticipate someone calling you a big shot. You feel really good for 5 seconds when they point out like, oh, look how great this person is. And then it becomes a memory. Like, oh, remember when that person said how great I was? And the interesting thing about that is because what I loved about that example is it juxtaposed thinking, which is what most of our listeners can relate to, and that feeling, and how there's almost like a bridge between them. And I would add to that Eckhart Tolle, there's like Buddhism's like enjoy the present moment. I think people can't really relate to that, myself included. Just be present, enjoy the present. The present is all that we have, right? Those kind. I can't really grok that, but when you draw that line of feeling, thought, it made so much more sense to me that way. And I thought it was a really good way to explain it to someone who has the thought before and the thought after, but misses that feeling. So how do you react to that?
Yeah, no, I love that you shared that. Something that I noticed during my first meditation retreat experience was that the thoughts that I had, like as they arose, there was often some like simultaneous corresponding sensation in the body that arose with them. And like making that connection between like, oh, that thought appeared and, oh, I feel this thing in my left shoulder. Like it was like, whoa, I really feel how those two are connected. And some of the most like transformative therapies, experiences, like there's a bunch of things, like there's Hakomi, there's somatic experiencing, all of these things have like fancy names. But ultimately, the general theme of what they're doing is inviting someone to like bring up a thought, like bring up a story. Maybe it's like, I haven't made enough money this year. Like that could be the thing. And then sitting with that thought and then kind of noticing, as you just said, like what do I then feel in my body? Like what do I notice at the same time? And then it's really just a game of curiosity. It's like okay, so I feel something, like, does it feel sharp? Is it dull? Like, where is it? Is it moving? And you almost just like have this kind of play with this feeling, and you just see what it does. And more often than not, it will move, it will shift, it will often track back to a certain emotion. And then there's the second part of the game is like, now can I actually have the courage to feel this thing? Can I have the courage to like inviting it in and stop resisting? And the real breakthrough for me was realizing that what I thought was a feeling, let's say it was like grief, for example, I was associating, and I actually think, this is my own personal theory, but I think the 5 stages of grief are actually 5 of the ways that we resist feeling grief. If that makes sense. So what we associate with an emotion is actually the way in which we're resisting that feeling. And when the resistance or the walls kind of drop away, there's this like, like I can feel it now. There's this like expansiveness, this like lightness, this freedom, joy, aliveness, like all of these things. And so for myself, going through this loop, a bunch of times, it's now at the point where like I love doing it, because it's almost like my own rule for aliveness. It's like, if I notice tension, numbness, something here, then explore, feel, and then I feel good. That's like the formula in a way.
I love it. And it, like, at the end of the day, we want to feel alive. We want to feel
good. Right.
We want to feel good. That's the thing. We want to feel good. And I think personally, I've learned that just relying on thoughts is not enough. It doesn't get you it's far enough in the process or the state of feeling good. And you said, as you're saying that though, I know the listener, there's like, okay, so I didn't make enough money this year, and so you're encouraging them to feel, and like, okay, I feel a pain in my upper chest, like above my heart, right? And then, but then they say, what the fuck do I do with that? Like, it's not going to solve, so where does one pull from there? Where does one venture toward?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, okay, let's use that example. Didn't make enough money this year. Generally speaking, there is very likely to be like some kind of emotional charge or constriction associated with that statement or that story. I didn't make enough money this year. And in my experience, I mean, it's almost like there's like 2 options here. Like, one option is like, okay, I'm gonna like crack the whip on myself even harder. I'm gonna double down. I'm gonna listen to podcasts on like 3x speed. Yes. I'm gonna like learn as much as possible.
Pull it back in.
Yeah, I'm gonna do all these things, and fuck it. I might be crushing my aliveness in the meantime, but I need to make more money,
and building that chronic stress debt.
And building chronic stress, that's almost separate, but that's there as well. And there's this sense of like, I'm going to double down on controlling and gripping this thing. Ooh. So that's one option. And for many people, that's probably the option that they would take. And then the other path is the path of, I think of it as like being curious about your experience. And so let's say hypothetically, you go into that feeling, you then connect the sense of like not enough money to an experience growing up where like a formative story around money was formed. Maybe that tension, maybe there was like hurt there, maybe there was like pain of like not having enough money growing up, and there's a fear of like feeling that pain again. But whatever that thing is, and it's probably going to be different for everyone, whenever that is completed or that is integrated back into their psyche, firstly, more aliveness comes through. Like that's probably the key thing. And then secondly, more possibilities, like more choices arise, like choices that didn't appear to be possible. It's almost like the third door appears on the other side of this. And it's, in my experience, the third door doesn't appear until we've actually had the courage to feel the thing. And that third door might be like, oh, I'm just going to call someone up and make a deal that I hadn't thought of before. It's like there's more expansiveness and more options. And in that increased possibility space, the thing that we actually wanted ends up happening anyway in a way that's far more easeful than if we'd like doubled down on like cracking the whip even harder.
Dude, you you fucking nailed it. It's that third door. That's just the perfect. This happened to me so many times because I am that person that's like, I didn't make enough money this quarter. And then I would go, literally this is how emotionally that muscle, the regulation muscle, how weak it was for me. I would I'd smash like 50 burpees to just be like, I could do this, okay? Then I'd listen to like Tim Ferriss on 2.5 audio speed. And then I'd be like, God, why am I so stressed out right now? And then I'd go like pound 3 drinks. And then that was the loop. And then of course, who the fuck's going to come up with the right creative solution if that's your coping mechanism?
Yeah.
Right.
And you can tie this to the nervous system too, because like when we're in that stress state, like I said, our vision is narrowed, but also our kind of like mind space is narrowed. So we literally, it's like we have blinders on. We don't see the other options, which are there when we kind of relax into it.
I love it. And it's true that the times when I'm able to just sit through it, not grab a drink, be uncomfortable, be curious, smile through it, then this third door, it always fucking appears. It's like, why don't you call this person? And then this person's like thrilled to hear from me. It's like 10 grand in revenue. Like literally money shows up. Once the money shows up in that third door. But again, it's almost like I'm drawing like a dip, so you like go into a trough. And then you have two ways to go. You can go deeper in the trough, like keep burying your head in the sand and hoping to find like a penny or something. Or you can just kind of relax, kind of let things play out. You know, if you think in surfing analogies, like let the waves, like let the set pass, and then come back into it, and just with a fresh new perspective. And sometimes the new perspective is, you got to work harder, right? Like that might actually be behind the third door, but at least you gave it justice and you didn't come at it from this kind of jackhammer mindset.
Yeah, I love that. Well, so I'm curious for you, like, what are some other like rules for aliveness that you've been creating? And it sounds like it's a fairly recent shift that you've made. Like, what are some things that you've noticed as you've been orienting in this different way?
Let's see. So I guess a big one is predetermined containers. And what do I mean by that? It's actually, we were joking about this first, when people say you should do this. And so you should write a book. You should be on TikTok. You should have a tutor for your kids. I think that the aliveness, now it's like I actually sit with that. And before, I think to use the sympathetic, at first when someone's like, you should do this, it would ignite my fight or flight reflex. And then I would go listen to this, do the whole cycle, burpees, podcast, alcohol, And then now it's like, well, I've been actually using a question from Tara Brach, which is, what are you unwilling to feel right now? What are you unwilling to feel? And the interesting thing about that is usually the answer does not come back with words in my head. It's not like, you're scared of this. It's not, you can't use, to me, it's where thoughts just aren't effective. And so you have to drop into that feeling. Then when you drop into the feeling, this like weird kind of magic happens where it's a little bit like meditation. It just kind of dissolves. Right? So whatever that tightness, scared about money, or you should write a book, there's this tightness, Ali's writing a book, Tiago's writing a book, everyone's writing a book, and then you kind of sit with it and you're like, that something feels off here. There's a reason why my chest is thumping, is because I don't want to write a down the fairway nonfiction book. And so then I'm in the trough, and then it comes back out in the aliveness. It's like, I want to write a fucking weird ass book. Like a weird book that captures all these ideas that I have. And maybe a publisher won't want that. Fuck it. Who cares? Right? And then I'm like, can I start working on it right now? When before it was, I gotta, tell the publisher that like, these are the 8 books that look like the one that I want to write. I'm like, no, I want to write, this is the fucking weird one I want to write, So that would be one thing, is kind of what that heuristic, the rule. What am I unwilling to feel right now? And I've significantly decreased my alcohol consumption. And so I've had to really sit with that feeling, because alcohol just, boom, it makes it go away instantly.
Sure. Yeah.
So that would be one rule. Another one is, actually, a lot of it comes back to Tara Brach, is where there, she says, maybe not her, it says, where your attention flows, your energy goes. And so I've just been paying attention to where my attention is going. And so if my attention is going to how many people looked at my blog today, how much money is in my bank account, then my energy is flowing to engagement bullshit on Twitter or coming up with some harebrained scheme to make money. I'm like, I don't want my energy to go that. So it's almost like if you catch your attention, then you can kind of channel the downstream element to it. So that would be another one. And then another one is just, it's service, I would say, or genuine care. And I just love, so here's a classic example. People send me emails all the time responding to posts and so on, and DMs and all that. The typical influencer playbook would be like, or even the old K, that's $10 work. Some 19-year-old in Melbourne was writing to you, asking you a question about, what 21-year-old K would have done. You're not going to make money on that. They're not an influencer. And so the old K would be like $10 work, have, text expander response, point them to some links and so on. Now, though, like finding that love and that service and that connection, it's like, I'm like, this is why I do what I do. I do it so that I can have the conversation with a 19-year-old in Melbourne. I don't do it for the fucking 1,000 bots that are following me on Twitter, right? But it's easy to lose sight of that. But if I keep going back to that rule of like connection, love, and I really do think of it as service, in that when I believe that I have a lot of things to share with the world. And so, yes, if a 19-year-old kid in Melbourne wants to hear one of the things I want to share, fucking go hard on that, right? And it's not productive. It's like the opposite of listening to podcasts at 2x speed. But it is that essence. I mean, you could see, like for those of you who are questioning, you could see how animated. It's probably the most animated I've been in this podcast. And I've started at a high bar because you animate me. And so those would be a few of the rules that I've been leaning into. And by the way, the money comes. When you respond to the 19-year-old in Melbourne, somewhere, somehow, a seed of karma is planted in your life, which, again, if you know how to make money, the money will show up.
Yeah. Oh man, I love hearing that. And I do a similar thing where I don't have any rules for myself, but I'll just like scroll through the DMs or scroll through the emails, and I'll almost just like let my body decide like which ones I want to reply. And I don't reply to everything always. I don't have that rule, but if I feel moved to or inspired, it just comes. But I think that the theme that was almost coming through for me as you shared those three examples were, there's almost like this sense of like having a trust in life and like a trust in yourself that there will be an option or a thing that isn't immediately obvious right now. And I think that's the big leap for people. And David White has this idea where like with each step that you take, the view of the horizon looks a little bit different. And so it's like you kind of take that step and the horizon changes and more third door options appear. But there is that step that you have to take. Maybe it's feeling the emotion where your mind can be saying like, no, that's silly. I can go and do these 5 things and be more productive with the mindset that I have right now. But I think it's really, for me anyway, it's like trusting in life to bring me opportunities that I can't see right now, and trusting in myself to figure things out as I follow this like aliveness.
And it's the beautifully said. And that third door analogy, it's like, we can sit here pontificating about the third door, but it's like Jim Carrey talking about being rich and famous. You kind of have to experience it yourself.
Yeah, sure.
You can't read a book about it, so to speak. But that's the beauty of having this conversation. Like, we spent 90 minutes talking about the third fucking door. Like, we're not making this shit up. So I guess in closing, how do we like tie this back? Because I feel like we went far afield from the podcast at 2x speed question, but I actually think we were on it the whole time as well. How do you tie it?
So I'd love to like ask you, like, do you still listen to podcasts on 2x speed? And if not,
No.
why? Like, what changed? What do you think shifted for you?
I think initially it was what you said, which we didn't delve too much into, is like the unhealthy motivation behind why you do it. And I think it's a very kind of ego-driven, like make more money, just, very capitalist intense. It's like, and I think a lot of people listening to this would say, if you could take the contents of the podcast and just like shove them into my brain, like without me even having to listen to it, they're like, listening to it is just the delivery mechanism. Like, I just want the output. So I think I was able to kind of step back on that. And I think Nat Eliason and I did a long episode. I think a lot of it is just like productivity porn. It's just, it just makes you feel, makes you feel good in the moment, but it's not really like moving the needle on your life. So that'd be like the $10 revelation. I think the 10K revelation was this, like, I think it really does come back, that this shallow breathing, kind of tunnel vision, this tightness in my body. And again, I had to feel what it was like to not be tight in my body, to not be a shallow breather, to not have tunnel vision. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so it's almost like certain things, like as soon as I felt, I had a 7-minute limit on Twitter on my phone, 7 minutes. But those
Another
7 minutes brought
rule for aliveness.
Exactly. But those 7 minutes brought that really icky feeling in my body that it was too much.
Yeah.
I'm like, my life is not worth these 7 minutes of tightness. So I just deleted it from my phone. And so I think that, so 2 steps. One is like kind of the unhealthy motivation was the first one. And then the second one was just, again, and I really attribute a lot of this to your work and our friendship, is just learning how to feel. And once you've felt, you can't unfeel. Right. And that has just said, like, I'm like, my breathing's being shallow. In fact, even during these podcasts, I often pay attention to my breathing. I'm like, is my breathing getting shallow? Just nerves, sometime intensity. I'm just like, no, like, take it back down. It usually gets better once I downshift.
Yeah, I love that so much. Yeah, I almost want to close with the thing that I shared in the beginning around like if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, oh, I should try these things because Kay said it's a good thing. Like basically fuck that. But if you want to like run an experiment for yourself and try one of these things and just out of interest, like what happens, my experience has been that there is like an adventure. It's a giant friggin' third door. It's like, it's a different way of orienting to life, which, in my experience has just been much more joyful. And there's this element of like grateful surprise as well that I think I wouldn't have anticipated when I was like a younger version of me, where there's like a humility in that, like, I don't have all the answers. I don't know exactly how things are going to work out, but I'm just going to like keep following my aliveness and just like being amazed by what shows up and what transpires. And that for me is like, if I was to imagine myself at like 90 years old looking back, I'd rather have lived that life where there's this like constant invitation and opportunity for this surprise, as opposed to like making a 20-year plan and just like executing like a machine. Like that to me sounds honestly boring. So I think maybe I'm just wired for adventure. Like I prefer the more adventurous path.
Beautiful. Beautiful, man. And yeah, some people always say, well, you don't have time, you don't have money. It's like, it's your breath. Your breath is free. You're always breathing, right? You're always breathing. You're always laying in bed breathing. Six to 9 hours a day. So
you don't need to do like a 2-week ayahuasca retreat.
Exactly.
To feel.
Exactly. Oh, Jonny, man, we could talk forever. So we talk in the lineup, we talk surfing, we talk out in Boulder. Thank you, man. Tell our listeners where can they learn more about you, about your course, and any other projects you got going on.
Yeah, thank you, man. This has been so much fun. If people want to learn more, I actually just shared a free 5-day email course that if this resonates, this might be interesting. It's 5tothrive.email. Okay. A bit of a weird link. And that's like an introduction to a bunch of the stuff we've just been talking about. And then the nervous system mastery course applications are open right now, and we're starting on 25th of September. So if that's of interest, the website is nsmastery.com. Yeah, and Curious Humans podcast as well.
We'll put all of those in the notes. All right, Jonny. Thanks so much, friend.
It's been great. Really appreciate you, man.